it's like the pastor serves everybody else, and you ask who's helping the pastor. It's like usually the wife is helping the pastor stay together. She's the cut man in his corner. When he's cut up from ministry, he goes and takes a break between rounds. She's the one fixing his face because it's all bruised up. But then who's fixing her? Who's helping her? And so to pause long enough to see, like, man, my poor sweet wife is more broken than I realized, and she has her own stuff too. But we just haven't stopped long enough because ministry has consumed our lives.
Welcome. You're listening to The Glass House, hosted by Lifeway. We're Ben and Lindley Mandrell, and we have conversations with leaders who have experienced the stress of ministry and have sensed a spotlight on their personal lives. We want to encourage ministry families and provide a glimpse inside their glass house. Now, before we start this episode, I want to invite you to participate in the conversation. If you have feedback to offer, a general question for Lindley or me, or if there's a topic you'd like for us to tackle in the future, email us at president@lifeway.com. We read every one of those emails. All right, so on the Glass House today, we have Noe and Clancey Garcia, who are out in Phoenix, Arizona. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Let's get started today by just a little bit of background. We're going to talk about trauma and anger and your story, and there's been so much written on this, even in recent books and studies you've done with us. But tell our listeners a little bit about you guys and the background.
Sure. So we've been married almost 12 years. It'll be 12 years in March. We have 4 children, ages 10, 8, 6, and 4. So a very busy household. She was raised in Kansas. I was raised in Houston. We met in San Francisco when I was at Gateway Seminary, and she was working at the academy there. Met her in August to my birthday party. Proposed in January. Married in March. Pregnant in June.
Wow. We thought we had the fastest
It's like
story.
a whirlwind.
That is amazing.
Yes, it's moved pretty fast.
You've been pretty outspoken, Noe, about the pain to redemption story and some of the trauma and difficulties you've faced over the years. So, start telling a little bit of those mile markers and things that happen in your guys' lives and marriage.
Absolutely. We both come from broken homes, families with divorced parents. For mine, a lot of my pain probably came from the absence of a father in the home. And I would say a lot of her pain probably came from the absence of her mother in the home. And so both went through our different challenges. My dad's from Mexico, was an alcoholic, womanizer, beat my mother all the time. Parents divorced when I was about 5 or 6. I share this in the book, and actually I share it with my church this past Sunday, but I just went through a lot of trauma. Starting at 5 years old, was molested as a kid by family members several times, really broken and shattered, angry, bitter. Started partaking in just anything that would accept me, street stuff, gangs. Led to early just drug use, alcohol use, immorality of every kind. Led to a suicide attempt at 18 years old. And then I become a believer at 18, but still don't recognize how to deal with this trauma in my life. Mm. And then so you have Clancey on the other side, parents divorced, not a strong relationship with her mother, some voids there. We meet, and get married. And then all of it begins to come out. I recognize that while we both had the desire to be different, we didn't know how to be different. Mm. And so we had the want to, we didn't have the how to. So I would say that's kind of what in our marriage, our first year led to the really exposing, man, we knew this junk happened in our lives, but we didn't realize how it would impact us in our marriage.
Clancey, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what you thought you were signing up for in marriage and what that turned out to be.
Sure. So our first year of marriage, I didn't see a picture perfect marriage growing up, and obviously Noe did not as well. But I did see great marriages in the church after I got saved. I got saved later in middle school. and really was discipled by my youth pastor and his wife pretty closely. And so I got to see a picture of what that looked like. And I was signing up to marry a pastor, right? So I think, hey, our marriage, I really naively thought it would just look just like theirs did. And very quickly realized that it did not. And we really didn't have the tools in our belt to figure it out. I never felt like the void of Noe not wanting to be a great husband or my desire not to be a great wife. It wasn't a intentional, like, hey, this kind of is not going well and let's just like throw in the towel. It was like, we really wanted a great marriage. How in the world do we do that? We were both believers, obviously. We were putting the Lord first truly in our personal lives, but we were not really connecting on a deeper level in our marriage yet with that. Don't you think?
Yeah.
I think we just didn't see what that looked like. We were both kind of maybe survivors in our own stories. And so we were both very, very independent. I was raised with a single dad for most of my life. And he raised me to be, I was not to need anybody else other than myself to take care of me. And Noe swoops in and he desperately wanted to love me well and take care of me. And really, I kind of pushed against that a little bit. And that did not work out very well for the first few years of our marriage, probably.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the prosperity gospel and like people preach a gospel that, you know, if you love Jesus, you're going to be rich and wealthy and healthy. I think there's also a prosperity marriage gospel that we believe of, you know, we're both Christians. We both want the same thing. We're going to figure this out. And then we get into marriage. Sometimes we're like, we can't figure this out. Like, what's wrong with us that we can't figure this out? Was there some of that going on early on in your marriage in terms of just, I thought it would be easier than this?
Yeah, I would say 100%. You know, you always fantasize about what you think your marriage is going to be like and how it's going to be different. And over years, you create this fantasy in your head and you begin to feed this fantasy and it becomes just this novel that you've written over time. Then when you actually live it, your fantasy usually cannot coexist with the reality. And there's an explosion that happens. And for us, that explosion happened because this was nothing like the movies I've been watching. This was nothing like Notebook. This was nothing like, you know,
yeah.
And it just wasn't making any sense. And I think we both got to the point where we started thinking, which is to some degree because we've never seen healthy marriages and we've never seen healthy conflict resolution either.
Yeah.
And so when we would fight, we would think, oh no, this means divorce is next.
Right.
Our minds would go straight to that thought process. And it was like, not that we wanted it to, but it's the only thing we knew. You see a fight, you see fight after fight. I didn't know fight was supposed to last a month. I didn't know fights could last a month.
Right.
And then you think, the next thing must be divorce. Mm-hmm. And then you have to feel like, well, I'm a pastor. I'm in seminary. How do I keep this facade? Mm-hmm. And my life is dedicated to this. How do we get help? But if we get help, it means someone's going to think that I shouldn't be a pastor. So there's all these layers to it. And man, we had no clue how to navigate it. No clue.
We began this just because, you know, out of our year of counseling. And we laugh because I think maybe the first or second time we were in counseling, Ben said, you know, when are we going to be done with this? Like, when will we have figured it out? You know,
right.
Because I think you just think at some point we're just going to have figured it out. And the counselor says, are you human? I mean, you know, are we still living on this earth? Because for as long as we're on this earth, we are going to struggle.
Let's talk a little bit more about this prosperity marriage gospel. I do think it's a reality that most couples get married thinking they're not going to have problems. I remember reading John Gottman, authority on marriage, said that the euphoric feelings associated with the honeymoon phase last between 18 and 24 months. So about 2 years in,
that's longer than we had.
That would have been nice.
Yeah, we enjoyed 12.
But at the most 2 years in, you're now looking at each other and you're seeing each other as you really are. Broken, all kinds of issues. And how am I going to stay in a marriage that doesn't feel good every day? And I think what he talks about here is that fantasy fantasy cannot coexist with reality. Mm-hmm. At some point, that blows up on all of us, and we have to deal with our marriage. And in the context of a glass house, it's even more exposing.
Well, I think when we're dating, I can remember this specifically. Our very first time to talk, you and I met at the chapel and you asked me like question after question. And I remember thinking in my head, man, he is totally dialed in. He is so engaged. He's curious about my family. He's writing stuff down. Like he's the real deal. Well, then you get what you were. But when you get married and then you have jobs, I was still in school, life moves forward. And I felt for me, the first thing was, wait, he's not asking questions anymore. He's not trying to get to know me deeper anymore.
I think what Noe and Clancy refer to is when the shine wears off, the pursuit wears off, especially for the guy.
Mm-hmm.
But this is how most guys think, and I would say definitely say pastors I've talked to, is when there's something always blowing up in the church. There's always a meeting to get ready for. There's a sermon to get ready for. Those things are always, there's tension around preparation. The thing that you worry about the least is your wife. She's going to be there. She's committed. There's a covenant intact. And so it's easy to not pursue your wife in that you're pursuing a sermon because you got to be on stage this Sunday and people are going to know you're not prepared. And what happens over the course of time is that you just begin to get more and more bitter because you get pushed down the list of priorities.
I believe it has come out of my mouth before during a fight of what's keeping us together.
And those are hard questions because in those moments I always feel shame, like I should be doing more. And it could just be conviction that I need to step up and do more. And I think every pastor struggles with that in terms of, am I pursuing my wife and family at the expense of my church? Well, big piece of that and the topic of the show today for us is beginning to understand the emotion of anger. You know, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about anger in the church. You know, it never says it's a sin to be angry. It says be angry, but don't sin in your anger. So anger in its purest form is emotion and passion, and I care about this, and that's why I'm fired up right now. And Lindley and I both have a personality that we get fired up pretty easy. That's how God's wired us up. Neither one of us is what I would call laid back. So what do you do when you marry somebody that's also, a stick of dynamite, who has a lot of anger, and you haven't been trained.
Passion.
Yeah, it's passion.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't been trained how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of emotional healing is learning how to harness that anger in a positive way rather than destructive way. And it sounds like you guys have had quite a journey with anger.
Yeah, I think our anger showed up in different ways. Mine was more of a run. You know what? I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to go for a drive until I feel better. And that way, I'm angry and upset. Or I'm going to say something that I didn't mean to say because I didn't process it long enough because I was angry and anger took over and then hurt her. I think the way she would respond in anger was going to be, I'm so angry, so I'm not going to talk to you for 2 days. And so we both had our different ways to deal with it, which both of those were kind of shutting down and running away from the problem. So the problem never really got resolved. And even to today, we still have to work on that. We still have to work on, you know what, I don't want to face this problem or this issue because it's going to reveal that I suck as a husband and dad. And so if I have to look at this issue in the eyes, it's going to tell me you're not there and you suck. And I don't want to hear that and I don't want to see it. So how do I go for a drive and come back when we don't have to talk about it so I don't have to remind myself that I'm not good at it?
You seem like, this is our first experience with you, you seem like the nicest, sweetest person. Like, do you have a lot of anger? Like, how do you deal with it?
I am a silent anger, I would probably say. There are things that I'm a stuffer. So what I've learned about myself. And
a shamer. And a,
hey.
She doesn't need your help.
You might see a moment here. I think just growing up in a hard family, and I was the only daughter with 3 other brothers. So what I did a lot was retreat and stuff. So I would, kind of recluse to my room a lot. And even as in our marriage, I just wanted space. So if Noe were to hurt me or we had a disagreement, I'm like, I'll have some space. And then I would very often get very quiet, which immediately he's like, what's wrong? I'm like, don't want to talk about it. He's like, something's wrong. Nope, don't want to talk about it. Like, it was just kind of one of those things. But I would stuff, and he would have no clue I was even upset about something. And then that's when it would come out of like more of an angry emotion. Like he's like, well, what the heck? Where did that even come from? I did not like conflict. Does that make sense? I actually
Makes
still
sense.
really hate conflict.
Mhm.
So
It's like last week, she starts to pick up the kid's shoes, and it's like, I'm tired of being the only one who cleans up. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Where did that come from here? We're sitting here watching the Chiefs. Like, what's going on right now?
Well, she had a lot of things stuffed down there, and that was the
There you
straw.
go.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Isn't that how it works?
100%.
In your book, Repurposed, you introduced us to a term that I'd never heard before, philophobia. Talk about what that is, because I think that's a fascinating phenomenon.
Yeah, I never came across this word until I wrote the book, and I just like it perfectly described me. Philophobia is the fear of love or being loved.
Okay.
So the fear of receiving it, the fear of giving it, the idea of love itself is terrifying and paralyzing. And so, I came across that word as I was studying. I was really trying to figure out, how do I describe and express who I was? And when I came across that word, I thought, this is me. This is me, this deep fear of loving, this deep fear of allowing people to love me, because I'm not sure what they would do without love. And the reason why there is a fear there was, again, seeing the marriage, my parents' marriage so broken, made me afraid of love. But then I think what really messed me up and really damaged me and really traumatized me was, when I was 5 or 6 and I was sexually abused by a family member. If that's what protection and love was supposed to be, then I wanted no piece of that. And so from 5 up until I met Clancey, 28 years old, which is a long time, I just pushed everybody away. Everybody only got the shallow me, because I felt like if they saw the real me, they would reject me. But if they rejected the facade of who I was, then it wouldn't hurt as bad, because they just got the fake me anyway. And so relationships were just constantly broken. I didn't have conflict resolution in my life, didn't know what that looked like. So when things would go south, I just cut it off.
Just write people off and just move on.
That's it. Growing up, I went to about 10 different schools. And so I moved every year. So I learned how to perfect writing people off and having no emotions attached to that, and suppress it and keep going. And so relationships being broken, that's okay. Next, which is horrible. I learned in my dysfunction how to function in a way that I thought was healthy. And my unhealthy way of functioning became normal to me. And so when I meet Clancey, I actually begin to love her. And I want this at the age 28, but I became so afraid that she would hurt me like everybody else had. So I began to put her through this, which sounds so messed up. But 12, 13 years ago, I began to put her through this boot camp and trial of love. How long are you going to stay? Let me show you the ugly part of me to see if you're going to stay after I show you this. Oh, you passed that test? Okay, let me take you home to meet my messed up family who lives in backwoods trailer, and we don't have much money. If you stay after this test, then that's, you're really there. Then I'll give you another test after that. And it wouldn't went away, by the way. I had to go home and meet her family too. So I had some tests I had to go through.
But what you're saying is it was a never-ending process. As soon as she finished one, you just present another one, because that was your way of protecting yourself from having to be vulnerable.
So does a person, for a lack of a better word, graduate from that? I mean, how do you move beyond that fear?
It sounds so, and I know this sounds so unhealthy and so messed up, because it is. And I also know that I'm probably not the only one that has dealt with this. And if I take it back, I got to own it now as a believer and adult. But if I go back and trace it, no doubt it went back to my molestation moment of not sure who would stay and who would hurt me and I lived that way. What's really sad is the graduating moment for me to think that she's actually going to stay is when she said, I do, at the altar, which is really sad, because up to that point, I was terrified. I thought she can still leave if she wants to, because that ring's not holding her here. Then even after she said, I do, there was this piece that was like, ooh, she's not going anywhere. But then even every once in a while in our marriage, it would be like, is she going to stay? Or am I so broken that she's not going to want to deal with this?
I want to go back and talk about something that Noe mentioned that I've never heard anyone talk about, and that is when his marriage began to unravel, there was fear of, now I've invested all this time in ministry. If our marriage fails, I don't know what I'm going to do. I do admit that there have been times in our marriage when I was like, holy cow, like if I'm a dentist and you leave, I can keep being a dentist.
Yes.
But if I'm in ministry and you leave, like I have no other skills.
And it's a scary amount of power for the pastor's wife, because you really can wound your husband by saying, you know, everyone else thinks you're so great, but I'm leaving you. And then what are you going to do? Where are you going to go from there?
And so there's a fear of, man, if our marriage falls apart and she decides to go public with what she knows about me, I really don't know what I would do. I don't even think Home Depot would hire me.
They for sure would not hire you.
So it's
do you know what a hammer is?
A left-handed hammer. I do not understand other things well. So I'm all locked in on loving people and being a pastor. And at certain moments in our life, I've wondered, if you leave, not only do I lose you, I lose everything I know. Mm-hmm. I've never heard a pastor talk about that. And it's a fear that we all carry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear Clancey's side of this, because I feel a lot of my own dysfunction, very different brokenness story than yours, Noe, but I am the master at letting people feel like I'm loving them, but keeping the wall up at the same time. And Lindley has said things to me like, you're hard to be close to. Do you see Noe doing that? Like you can sense when he's beginning to fall back to those default patterns, or how do you respond?
I do. And I think what I've seen the most, just with Noe in the pastorate, when someone at the church has hurt him, it's not a backlash towards me, like an anger towards me at home, but I can sense that he's building walls of protection, probably from, honestly, from church life. Yeah. But then I feel a little bit of tension in our marriage, not in a, we're fighting, we're arguing, we're more of just a little bit of a pullback.
Distance.
And typically I have to say, hey, I'm feeling like you're pulling away, what's going on? And it's most often he's building a wall with someone else. But it very quickly, I think, brings back, well, he's protected himself from everybody. I see it with the kids too, which is really interesting. When he's struggling with a relationship outside of our home and building walls, I see a little bit of pullback with the kids. And I think it's almost like this emotional capacity is shot.
I'll bet there's a lot of pastors' wives out there that are resonating with this moment right here. They're married to a husband that's angry, he's hurt, and there's compassion for him.
Well, what you just said is completely true for our marriage, in that there are times where he's not necessarily angry towards me, but I can tell, he does things like he'll type harder on his phone. I can tell that he's got some little triggers that I can tell something's wrong, and I'll ask, are you okay? I'm fine. And once I push a little bit harder, it turns out there's something that's been happening.
No,
that's when
I tell you you're overreacting and you need to calm down.
And then I push a little harder.
That's right.
Have you guys done any counseling through this?
Yes, we've done individual counseling, and we've done marriage counseling as well.
What have you learned? What has that process done for you?
I think sometimes, and you can speak to this next, but sure. But for me, it's when I was able to sit in a room with her and the counselor's pulling stuff out from her that I didn't see, or I didn't take the time, because it's always been about let's fix me. How do we fix me? I'm a pastor. I deal with so much. If we're not careful, it's like the world revolves around, our life's all about me and my schedule and my writing and so it's always like, how do we fix me, right? Unintentionally or intentionally. And then, but for us, when we pause in the moment, I already knew I was messed up. But when we pause in the moment and the counselor begins to unpack things about Clancey, I begin to have compassion for her that I guess I didn't stop long enough to see, like, man, she's been the one putting me together. And I didn't recognize she has her deep own wounds too. That who's helping her? Because it's like the pastor serves everybody else, and you ask who's helping the pastor. It's like usually the wife is helping the pastor stay together. She's the cut man in his corner when he's cut up from ministry. He goes and takes a break between rounds, and she's the one fixing his face because it's all bruised up. But then who's fixing her? Who's helping her? And so to pause long enough to see like, man, my poor sweet wife is more broken than I realized, and she has her own stuff too. But we just haven't stopped long enough because ministry has consumed our lives, and that means it's me. And what I've learned is like, how do I help Clancey get healthier too from what she's experiencing, not just me.
Man, stop right there. That boxing illustration was one of the best I've ever heard. That was so good because I felt in counseling like this realization that most of our marriage has been about me, like my issues.
I've been trying to say that for years.
But I think a lot of pastors are this way. We become pretty narcissistic about, hey, I've got to get me fixed because the whole congregation is riding on my emotional health. So like, I got to get me fixed. And our wives are over here wondering like, hey, I'm dealing with some stuff too. I mean, I know that you resonated with that. What was your response?
Well, we had a specific counseling session that I can remember zoning in on me. And it made me uncomfortable for a little bit because so much of the time we really do get to talk about things, not necessarily even with him, but things that are going on in his life. And he zoned in on me. And I mean, things came out of me that I didn't even really remember, almost trauma that I had tried to forget about totally. And he sat there and said, I had no idea. Like I had no idea this happened. And at the end, the therapist just said, Ben, stand up and hug her. And that was all that he said. That's all the reaction that you need right now is just, you don't have to say anything, just hug her. And I sat there and cried on his shoulder for a long time. And we felt so connected.
I felt connected, but I felt ashamed. Like, I can't believe that I've not recognized that you're a person with all of your own stuff. And there's a sense of shame of like, I should have paid attention to you a lot earlier in our marriage. Clancey, how have you felt in terms of when the spotlight gets turned on you? Is it really weird for it all of a sudden to be about you?
Very uncomfortable. I remember, the first few sessions, I can't remember how many we had, maybe 8 or so. And we did really focus on Noe. And I remember starting to feel a little bit of resentment, but I remember when the tables were turned, I didn't even know what to say. I remember just sitting there and they asked a question, how's your heart? How are you? And I'm like, I do not know. But they kept trying to dig deeper and I could not voice how I was feeling, which was a really interesting thing for me. And I think frustrating for Noe because he wanted to help me, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't ever voice what I was feeling.
Coming from the pastor's wife perspective, how did Noe receive that when you said, I would like to do some individual counseling? Because I imagine that there's a lot of pastors out there who would say, I want to be present to hear what you say, because I want to be fairly represented.
He actually was super gracious. I was really impressed with him. That was one of the takeaways from when we were doing the marriage counseling together was I thought he would be guarded, honestly, in a way of like, I couldn't really share, and I think that was part of my hesitancy at first was I felt like if I say something in the counselor's eyes, am I shaming Noe or am I making him look bad? Or I think that was kind of part of that wrestle at the beginning. But he, in our first time, was very like, hey, you like free game. You need to share. And honestly, he was super, super encouraging about getting counseling on my own. What he has done after I do speak with a counselor, he loves to be able to hear what we talked about. Not I don't think in a worried way. I think he just really wants to know what's going on. And was I able to get to something with someone else?
There's couples out there listening right now, and they are feeling just as broken as you are. And they fear that their church would know how broken they are. Like, I hope they never find out that we don't have it all together. So as you guys have been more vulnerable and raw about your story, are you hearing from pastors and wives that say things like, thank you for making it okay for us to be human beings?
Not that we put up a facade, but we're very cautious of sharing that we had stuff. And there was just this switch in him that decided to say, hey, we're going to live our life where people are already watching everything we do and critiquing everything we say. And the moment I think the vulnerability came, it's been unbelievable how the Lord has used that. The transparency, I think, is lacking in a lot of places. It makes me anxious a little bit sometimes that he's so vulnerable with our story and his story. But honestly, on the other side of seeing what the Lord is doing, it's worth it.
I think pastors and ministry people especially fear that all of their trauma and difficulty in marriage is going to come out in the church.
For sure.
And so we do try to create this facade that all this can blow up inside our house, but it cannot go outside those doors, which feels unfair because other people's stuff comes out. We see people blow up on each other all the time.
And kind of think it's funny.
Yeah, and we relate to it. Like, hey, glad we're not the only one that had a major blow up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and I know there's stories on the other side too.
Do you want me to share stories on the other side?
Well, I feel like it would only be fair.
I mean, I think that one of the most traumatic ones for me, when we moved to Denver, we had been there for about 5 days, and I began to be really, really ill. And turns out I had a ruptured appendix. And so we went into the hospital, had the surgery. Well, the next morning I was still pretty out of it. And the doctor came in to talk. And as he began to speak, Ben's phone rang and he said, "I'm so sorry, I've got to get this. This is, a financial giver to the church or something." And I felt at that moment abandoned by Ben, because in a time of need, he wouldn't even pause a phone call to, from what may be a potential financial gift. And that has come up several times in our marriage, just something in that was really traumatic for me.
You felt abandoned because you were abandoned.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to say that. But
I mean, I was completely out of line and my head was not in a healthy place. For me to take a fundraising call while the doctor's delivering news about my wife's ruptured appendix, which could have taken her life, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. But it also shows how we act under stress. And how embarrassing it is. And I think that's the hard thing about marriage is our spouse has seen us in such humiliating moments that it's hard to even deny moments of abandonment or trauma. What would you say is one of the most difficult things about living your life out in public?
I'd say for me, it feels like it's hard to find rest. It's hard to find rest. I don't feel like we ever truly get to rest. You put your child in a sports game, and on the weekend, you just want to rest and watch your child play. But even there's no hiding, right? No, there's not anywhere we can go where we can just rest and let our hair down. I don't have any hair, but you know what I mean? You always feel like you're on.
That's really
and
cool.
I don't even know what it's like not to be on and not to have to constantly be sure that, I'm dressed appropriately or I'm smiling at everyone just in case they go to my church, or it can be exhausting.
Do you ever just want to sit there on the bleachers and not talk to anybody and just watch the game?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. I went to the mall the other day. I was just tired. I was so tired. It's like, I'm going to go to the mall by myself and go walk, but it's going to be 40 minutes away and I'm just going to walk. And I'm tired.
We literally drove to a mall that was close to an hour away to just.
I'm surprised there wasn't a church member there, though.
Yeah.
Well, I hear Pastor Noe. Yep.
Oh.
I turn around like, "You got a minute?" But when to talk to you? And I was like, "Now listen, I love my church members."
Yeah, I know you do.
But that's what I mean.
I would second that. I think what I haven't or wasn't expecting, I think, is so much of this is now our children as they're getting older. I'm feeling the pressure of being the pastor and pastor's wife on them. And that's really burdensome for me. There was a man at the church, this is probably 3 years ago, maybe. And I really still have some PTSD, I think, from navigating this. Noe was in a prayer meeting. It was a Wednesday night activity. The kids were playing dodgeball, our oldest son, and Balin is a rule follower. He's just a firstborn. That's just the way he is. No one has ever told me, "Hey, Balin was disrespectful," or Balin, like, he's not, all of our kids are not that way, but he is the one that's going to follow the rules at church. And he threw a dodgeball and one of the volunteers, he turned and it hit his glasses and they bounced off his face. And that particular volunteer was super angry at Noe for letting someone go at the church the week previous. And he stood over Balin, at this point, he's a 7-8-year-old little boy, and started screaming at him, commenting things about, "I don't care that your dad's the freaking pastor," and on and on and on and on. And a teacher, pulled me out. Noe's in prayer meeting. I'm like, went mama bear really fast. If you want to see me angry, that's probably the way to get me going.
It's very common.
And
I hear that a lot.
I remember wrestling, thinking, I can't stop Noe in the middle of a prayer meeting. And then I thought, he's their dad and he would want to know what's happening. And so I had our security person go, grab Noe. And from that moment, honestly, my spotlight of the kids, it really is hard for me. I think just allowing them to, this man was just angry with Noe for a church decision, but took it out on our son.
The question that we end with is, what is the best part? Because, we all put up with these things for a purpose. And so what have you found to be the best part of living inside of the Glass House and having to deal with stories like that?
I always like to say that pastoring is a painful privilege. It's painful, and I think we've talked about some of the reasons why. And it's a privilege because God allows us to be part of His redemptive work in people's lives. And so I think the privilege portion is being able to love on and shepherd people, being able to lead people to Christ, being able to lead and shepherd and develop a young staff, being able to see my wife used by God in the ministry of leading Bible studies and walking with women, being able to baptize my son, being able to, these are the kinds of things that you're like, what, it's hard, God, but it's a privilege because God has called us to be part of His work. And we're just the tools He's using. We're the paintbrush to His canvas, and we're thankful, God.
I would say in the same breath of struggling, with the kids being seen like that, at the same time, the church has been so gracious to them for the most part. Our kids are actually getting to grow up in a really beautiful life too. Just getting to watch, I love that their dad is their pastor. Like, that to me is so special, that their dad is the one who's teaching them about the Bible every week in Sunday service. And that's really honestly been just such a joy.
I don't know if they like that, but we like it.
They don't always love it. Sometimes we get kicks like, how much longer is this going? But and honestly, I do at the same breath of like the community. I love hearing random stories when we do get stopped at supper, when it's frustrating at times. But people come and they'll say, "Hey, I just want you to know, man, your last sermon, I gave my life to the Lord, and now my wife and my kids and my, So those stories like that, I feel like it was what's so sweet when the Lord gives that to us, as a reminder that what we're doing means something.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Glass House. We would love to include you in the conversation. If something stuck out to you in today's episode, let us hear from you, or a topic you'd love to see us tackle in the future, or just any question you want to fire at Lindley and me. Email us at president@lifeway.com.
The Glass House is hosted by Lifeway, executive produced by Joy Almond, produced and edited by Angie Elkins Media, original music by Robert Elkins, sound engineering by Dale Sandberg, and artwork by Cameron Spooner.